Welcome to California Highways Route by Route. This podcast explores everything about the numbered highways in California, from Route 1 along the coast to US 395 along the Sierras, from Route 8 in the south to Route 139 in the north.
Brought to you by the California Highways webpage and Gribble Nation.
I'm Daniel Fagan. I do the California Highways webpage at www.cahighways.org.
I'm Tom Fear. I'm one of four admins on GribbleNation.org. Usually, not always, but usually, I'm the one talking about California.
This is bonus episode 2.15, Auto Trails in California. We are currently in our mid-season break while we write the episodes for Season 3, where we will cover Route 3 through Route 7. And we're getting closer to done on that. I'm on the last episode of Route 5. During this break, at a slower pace, we're bringing you some highway episodes on special topics. Today's episode discusses the auto trail system in California.
What are auto trails? The auto trails were the earliest form of signed automotive highways in the United States. The intent of the auto trails were typically to connect two or several major waypoints together in a well-signed routing which could be followed by drivers. The auto trails were typically managed and signed by private associations or promotion groups as opposed to government agencies. This led to some irregularities regarding where auto trail alignments went, as certain interests would often influence where they were signed. Within California, the signing of the auto trails was often contracted out to the Automobile Club of Southern California or the California State Automobile Association. Auto trail shields were mostly vertical rectangles, but there was really no true universal design. Some early auto trails, such as the American El Camino Real, used mission bells instead. Auto trails in general did not have universal forms of signage. This is really predating the MUTCD. The auto trail era is really where a lot of modern signage standards kind of became necessary or began to kind of evolve, but really in a primitive form that is vaguely familiar to the modern eye. Most major auto trails were signed on highways which became part of the U.S. route system. What auto trails were in California? Some trails maintained today: El Camino Real, the Anza Trail, the Volcanic Legacy Scenic Byway, the Pony Express National Historic Trail. Some historically significant auto trails: the Lincoln Highway, Pacific Highway, the National Old Trails Road, the Old Spanish Trail, and the Arrowhead Trail. Some others that are a little less known: the Atlantic Pacific Highway, the Bankhead Highway, California, the Banff Highway, Dixie Overland Highway, Lee Highway, Lone Star Trail, and the Midland Trail, and some others: the new Santa Fe Trail, the National Park-to-Park Highway, Pikes Peak Ocean to Ocean Highway, Santa Fe Trail, and Victory Highway. We will now explore each of these in detail. There's actually quite a few interesting stories here.
We'll start with El Camino Real. The American iteration of El Camino Real began to be signed in 1906 and is really the oldest example of an auto trail in California. The purpose of El Camino Real was to provide a signed touring highway that connected the 21 Spanish mission sites in California from San Diego north to Sonoma. Much of the El Camino Real would become heavily associated with LRN2 and US 101, although not all missions, I will say, are on there. I lived near the San Fernando mission, and that was not on US 101. The auto trail was signed along other state highway segments on the north and east side of San Francisco Bay. Today, El Camino Real is signed on Route 87, Route 82, Interstate 280, Route 37, Route 121, and Route 12. And if you actually look at the definition of it in the legislative code, they include one other highway that clearly was not part of El Camino Real and was a typo. El Camino Real has always been signed with mission bells, and for a long time they fell into disrepair and were being stolen. There was an effort, I want to say about 15 years ago, to bring them back, and when they brought them back, I think they brought them back as concrete bells, so folks looking to steal brass, don't try and go after them.
Although they still produce them today, you can still buy them from the original manufacturer. What I found interesting is you can often find the bells in really strange places that you would not expect. Like this week I'm in Monterey working, and one that I know of is on Alvarado Street in downtown Monterey. You wouldn't expect it there, and I don't know why it's there. It probably has been there for quite some time, but yeah, you can find them all over. Things are usually typically associated with emissions or anything that is tied to Alta California. You'll often find a mission bell somewhat nearby.
And there's your explanation for Monterey, because it's tied to the Presidio, which I believe was a Mexican installation.
Yep, it's just down the street from the Customs House, which was basically the port of entry to Alta California.
And I believe you'll find them. I think there is one at Mission San Fernando. I know there's one at Mission San Ynez. There's one at Mission San Buenaventura. So you can find them all over. The one I always remember, and I'm going to date myself here, is there's one in front of, and I still think of it as a First Interstate Bank building on Ventura Boulevard. I don't know what bank it's become now, but it's still there. But they're still around.
The Lincoln Highway. During 1912, Indiana businessman Carl G. Fisher conceptualized the Lincoln Highway as a major transcontinental auto trail. The Lincoln Highway was formally dedicated on October 31st, 1913, and was aligned west of Fallon by split branches over the Sierra Nevada mountains. The routing can be confusing because things kept changing over time. The northern branch of the Lincoln Highway entered California via the Dog Valley grade near Verde, Nevada, and followed it using what is now Dog Valley Road and Prosser Dam Road to Truckee. The second generation of this moved to LRN 38 between Truckee and the Nevada state line. From Truckee, the northern branch climbed over Donner Pass, following much of the grade of the Dutch Flat and Donner Lake Road. This would be LRN 37 and later US 40 towards Auburn. The original variation used Old Donner Summit Road. Later variations used Donner Pass Road until US 40 was completed. Near Colfax, the original route used Norton Grade Road, with the second generation using Rollins Lake Road. From Auburn, the northern branch followed LRN 17. This was, again, future US 40, and LRN 3, future US 40 and US 99E, later Route 160, to the downtown Sacramento, where it consolidated with the southern branch. The segment is roughly Interstate 80 and Business Route 80 today. The southern branch of the Lincoln Highway was sometimes known as the Pioneer Branch. The southern branch split from the main line in Reno, Nevada, and followed the Lake Tahoe Wagon Road, LRN 11, future US 40, over Johnson's Pass, west over the Sierra Nevada to Sacramento. But there were variations along this route. For example, the third generation of the southern branch followed US 50 much closer in Nevada. Near Folsom, there were routings that used White Rock Road, Placerville Road, and Bimble Street. The original route used Folsom Boulevard out of Folsom. A later variation used Greenback Lane from Folsom to Citrus Heights. From Sacramento, there were also multiple routes. The 1913 Lincoln Highway branched south of Stockton Boulevard, early at LRN 4, which is now County Sign Route J10, and later LRN 4, future US 99 and US 50, today's Route 99 towards Stockton. From Stockton, the highway followed Lower Sacramento Road and later LRN 4 to LRN 5. It then followed LRN 5, again US 50, and now today's Interstate 205 over Altamont Pass to Oakland by US 50 and today's Interstate 580, or roughly the corridor of, where it crossed San Francisco Bay to the city of San Francisco. A later iteration of the route roughly followed Route 16 and Route 275. This was LRN 6 and early US 40, LRN 6 and LRN 7, Route 12, LRN 8, Route 29, LRN 74, and US 40. This would be LRN 7 and 14 over the Carquinez Bridge, and then to Berkeley, where it used the ferry to cross to Fisherman's Wharf. This was before the Oakland Bay Bridge was built, keep in mind. Within San Francisco, the early Lincoln Highway landed at the Embarcadero Ferry Terminal. The highway followed Embarcadero, Market Street, Van Ness Avenue, Chestnut Street, Lion Street, Lombard Street, Presidio Boulevard, Barnard Avenue, Arguello Boulevard, Lake Street, 28th Avenue, Lake Street again, and El Camino del Mar to the Legion of Honor water fountain. Second variation crossed on Geary Boulevard, 36, Clement, and Legion of Honor Drive. Third generation used Hyde Street, North Point, and Van Ness. Van Ness, of course, was part of US 101, even today, to California Street across to 32nd and up to El Camino del Mar, ending again at the Legion of Honor water fountain. But these are just some routings. The Lincoln Highway Association, unlike many other auto trail associations, has never actually disbanded. They are still around today. The organization still fields signs of Lincoln Highway in modern times. The Lincoln Highway Association maintains an interactive map that shows all the routes the highway took. This map is really interactive. It's overlaid over Google Map. You can expand it. It will show you exactly where the highway was and what modern roads, if there's a detour required, you can use to drive to follow the alignments as closely as you can. The Lincoln Highway Shield is probably one of the most familiar that was probably ever out there in the auto trail world. It is red, white, and blue with an L symbol.
I'll note that we had the president of the Lincoln Highway Association on the podcast in our first season, Joel Windmiller. I think it was the episode on U.S. highways. What else do you think we want to add on the Lincoln Highway? It really had lots of different routings over the years, and it's really easy to get lost in what it was and what it might have been and what different routings it had taken.
This is more of a theory. So in the early planning stages of the U.S. route system, U.S. 50 ended in Fernley, Nevada. Didn't make it to California. And LRN 11 was going to be just the Lincoln Highway, the Pioneer branch. And I think that really speaks to the influence of the Lincoln Highway at the time. And it even lasted as a very prominent route into the U.S. route system era. The 1927 iteration used the Carquinez Bridge and was there several years before US 40 was realigned over the Benicio Martinez Ferry, or off the Benicio Martinez Ferry.
And since we're talking about the Carquinez Bridge, we had an earlier version of this that we had gotten wrong, and we had to fix it. If we sound a little different, that's why. Because we had forgotten that Lincoln Highway went through the American River Canyon. What do you know about that?
So that routing was built after the bridge. So the routing to the 1927 iteration of the Lincoln Highway is using actually went into the community of American Canyon itself. So the American Canyon cutoff is what actually became US 40. It more or less straightened out that whole alignment. I want to say Jessica's cousin actually for a time was living on a segment of, I think it was American Canyon Road, which was part of that alignment of the Lincoln Highway. So it kind of takes a lot of like 90-degree turns and everything that US 40 never really did, because they really improved that corridor in the 1930s. But yeah, I would probably say the Lincoln Highway had the most staying power of any of the auto trails, and it still does because it's still around. I mean, realistically, this is probably the most important auto trail that we're going to talk about today. It really influenced a lot of things that happened with the other auto trail associations and really had a lot of influence on how the early structure of the U.S. route system was built too.
And it is really worth going to the interactive map, which we will link in the show notes, and playing with it just to see all the different variations and all the old routings of the highway that are there that you could sort of drive and imagine you were tootling along at your top speed of maybe 30 miles an hour trying to cross all of this because the engines back then weren't that great. You couldn't go as fast as you go now. It really is an interesting experience. I'll note there are some excellent books out there on the Lincoln Highway, I know, because I've got one of them. Next, there was the National Old Trails Road. In April 1912, the National Old Trails Road was organized with the goal of signing a transcontinental highway between Baltimore and Los Angeles. Building a modern road for automotive use through the Mojave Desert of California proved particularly difficult as state highway maintenance didn't exist and the general path of travel was alongside the service routes of railroads. The first auto trail through the Cajon Pass was the Santa Fe Grand Canyon Needles National Highway, which was first signed in the Cajon Pass by 1913. The National Old Trail Road organizers later adopted the routing of that national highway in the western U.S. in 1914. The National Old Trails Road was able to secure funding to pave the route through Cajon Pass and construct the 1914 Crowder Canyon Bridge. The National Old Trails Road predated state maintenance in the Mojave Desert east of Barstow. This segment of the highway would eventually become part of LRN 58 by way of the 1919 Third State Highway Bond. This became the basis for what would become US 66, creating a number of controversies as we go along as people confuse the two. The terminus of the National Old Trails Road was at the Auto Club headquarters at 7th Street and Broadway. This is often mistakenly co-opted into the lore of US 66 and claimed to be the ending of US 66, which it never was, given the close history of the two highways. We talked in our episode on Route 2 in Los Angeles about where Route 66 ended in Los Angeles, and then again where it ended in Santa Monica at basically Pennsylvania, which is now Olympic and Lincoln. The National Old Trails Road shields came in red, white, and blue variations. There was also a diamond design which displayed a symbol showing the entire highway.
What's really interesting about the National Old Trails Road is not just in California, but also Arizona and New Mexico, that co-opted history. A lot of it's sourced from the Auto Trail. A lot of the nostalgia and lore and all the really classic stopping points and everything, they were National Old Trails Road destinations first, then they got realigned and bypassed by early US 66. So a lot of stuff, if you're a US 66 fan, if you're not paying attention to the National Old Trails Road, you're really doing yourself a disservice, and you really ought to look into its history, because it has been definitely co-opted.
Does that include things like Oatman?
That's one of the few exceptions, actually, is Oatman. Oatman, an early pre-1953 US Road 66, was a divergence from the National Old Trails Road. It was probably the most major one west of Santa Fe, New Mexico.
So Oatman was on National Old Trails, but not actually 66.
No, Oatman was 66. It was never National Old Trails Road. The National Old Trails Road went through Yucca.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Moving on to the Arrowhead Trail. This was an auto trail which was plotted in 1915 when a promoter and race car driver, Charles H. Bigelow, drove the entire planned route from Salt Lake City to Los Angeles. The Arrowhead Trail largely followed the path of the Los Angeles Salt Lake Road through the Mojave Desert. The original alignment of the Arrowhead Trail entered California near Bannock Siding along what is now U.S. Route 95. The early Arrowhead Trail largely was concurrent with the National Old Trails Road from Bannock all the way to Los Angeles. In 1925, the Silver Lake Cutoff was constructed from Las Vegas to Barstow. The Arrowhead Trail was realigned onto the far shorter alignment, which gave it enhanced utility. The Silver Lake Cutoff would be adopted as a portion of LRN 31 also during 1925. The Arrowhead Trail, in general, is heavily tied to the history of US 91 and, to somewhat of a lesser extent, to Interstate 15. The shield design was black and white, displaying a large arrowhead or downward-pointing triangle.
If I remember correctly, the Arrowhead Trail was interesting because it got into the whole mess of the Daggett versus Yermo stuff and where the destination was as it came into Barstow.
Yeah, that was part of the early routing, which that was one of the, once the AASHTO database got uncovered, that was one of the early things I looked into, was the terminus history of US 91, and then for a couple years it did end in Daggett, not actually Barstow.
Next, we look at the Old Spanish Trail. Plotted in 1915, the Old Spanish Trail spanned from downtown San Diego east to St. Augustine, Florida. Or I guess it's better to say, given the direction we tend to talk about things, it went from St. Augustine, Florida to downtown San Diego, which makes more sense than calling it the Spanish Trail. It generally followed an alignment that emulated the trade corridors explored by the Spanish in what is now the southern U.S. The western terminus of the Old Spanish Trail was at Horton Plaza in San Diego at 4th Street and Broadway. Horton Plaza was once adorned by the Pacific Zero Mile, which was twinned with an Atlantic structure in St. Augustine. The Old Spanish Trail originally followed what is Route 94 east of San Diego to the Imperial Valley. It crossed the Algodones Dunes Plank Road and entered Arizona by the Colorado River near Yuma. We'll talk about the Plank Road more in Season 4 when we talk about Interstate 8, because that's an integral part of the history of US 80, which predated Interstate 8. By 1931, the latter-day Old Spanish Trail was essentially followed concurrent with US 80 along legislative routes 12 and 27. The Old Spanish Trail shield was red, white, and yellow with an OST symbol vertically aligned.
I really never found good documentation. Like, I know that 0 mile marker is pulled from Horton Plaza, or was pulled a couple of years ago. I don't remember the exact reason why, but it's still, the one at St. Augustine still is there.
It may have been pulled for the same reason, well, for the reasons we'll discuss when I mention some of the other southern highways.
The Redwood Highway. The Redwood Highway was heavily promoted as an auto trail mostly by California from the northern end of San Francisco Bay to Grants Pass, Oregon. So this is 2 separate states that the Redwood Highway is in. The Redwood Highway corridor in California was adopted as Legislative Route 1 between San Francisco and Crescent City as part of the 1909 First State Highway Bond Act. LRN 1 was extended to the Oregon state line by way of the 1919 Third State Highway Bond Act. Oregon added their segment of the Redwood Highway to state inventory during 1917. Modern US 101 from the Golden Gate Bridge to Crescent City, along with the entirety of US 199, are still known today as the Redwood Highway. It is unclear if there was a standard Redwood Highway shield. Probably pretty unlikely, but usually there's like diamonds that the auto clubs would source that would note what the name of state-sourced auto trails were.
The one interesting thing I note there is that it went along US 199. So in Oregon, was it along US 101? Because I don't think US 199, I'm trying to remember where that connects to, but I don't think that connects to 101 on the other end of it.
No, it does not. It actually connected to the Pacific Highway, and even today, parts of US 199 in Oregon, there is still prominent Redwood Highway signage.
So US 101 in Oregon was not part of the Redwood Highway.
It was not. A lot of that didn't really even exist until the late 1920s. Speaking of the Pacific Highway, the Pacific Highway was plotted between San Diego and Vancouver, British Columbia in 1913. Unlike most auto trails, the Pacific Highway had a small segment located in another country, this being Canada. The Pacific Highway north of Benicia followed the entirety of LRN3 to the Oregon state line. Much of the Pacific Highway north of Woodland in general is tied very, very closely to US Route 99. South of Benicia, the Pacific Highway followed LRN14, LRN5, and LRN2 to San Diego. The Pacific Highway shields were a white and black diamond design displaying the full name.
So mapping that to somewhat modern numbers, we have US 99 down to LRN 14, which was part of US 40, LRN 5, which was part of, at that point, what would you say, US 48?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, no. That part of LRN 5 would not have been part of US 48 because that went to San Jose. So that would basically be the part that became mostly US 50 when it was extended to the Bay Area, and for a while US 101E. But for some context, given the highway was plotted teen, one might wonder is why didn't it just follow the Pacific Coast all the way up to Washington? The thing is, and I kind of hit on it already with the Redwood 1930, a lot of that coastal infrastructure just was not existing well into the late 1920s in Oregon. Likewise, in California, LRN1, I would contend, and this might be a controversial take among highway crowds, was a much grander project that really than any other First State Highway Bond Act road. And it really wasn't finished until around 1917 when it bypassed the Rattlesnake grade, which had like 40% inclines. So a lot of the Avenue of the Giants, Route 254, which was old US 101, that is the very, very early Redwood Highway that was finished in the late 1910s. That road just didn't exist when the Pacific Highway was first plotted, so that's why it dips inland to the modern routing of Interstate 5 and US 99.
Okay, but I'm trying to map this in my head because there's some interesting discontinuities here. So let's take this southern part here, south of Benicia. LRN 14 was US 40. LRN5 was your US 101E, which is what later became Route 17 and is today's Interstate I-880.
Correct.
And LRN2 is US 101 from pretty much San Jose down to San Diego.
Yes.
So that maps it for modern folks. Now we talk about it being the entirety of LRN3 to the Oregon state line. LRN14, if I remember correctly, does not go into Sacramento.
No, it does not. It did bypass Sacramento.
So how did this get from LRN3 to LRN14? Did it go along LRN6?
I believe it did. I want to say it went through Woodland.
Which would be, it went through Woodland, came down what later became Route 113 and was later US 99W, and went down US 40 to where it met LRN 14.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay.
I would need to look at a map to be 100% off, but yeah, off the top of my head, that sounds correct.
Okay. I'm just familiar with a lot of this stuff because I've been doing Season 3, and one of the things we cover in Season 3 is the portion of I-5 that had been US 99W, which goes through Woodland and up from Davis. So I've been following some of that stuff. And when we talk about Route 4 in the second episode of Season 3, we'll be talking about LRN 14 because Route 4 sort of paralleled LRN 14 going from Hercules over to near Benicia. Next, we have the inland route, and this is an example of an auto trail that was largely promoted by California on state-owned state highway, and it was entirely concurrent with Legislative Route 4 between Sacramento and Los Angeles. So basically, the inland route is what they called what became US 99. It's what became or what was the old Ridge route prior to US 99. It was signed with gray Auto Club style diamonds with red lettering that said inland route along the upper strip of the diamond. You don't hear that much about the inland route.
It's not a very catchy name. Just my take on it. It really gets buried under, like you got a cool sounding name like the Ridge route or the Grapevine Grade or the Grapevine. You just got a lot of more classic names that kind of took root there and kind of just buried the inland route underneath all that.
That, and I think it was subsumed in the lore of US 99.
Yeah.
It's one of the ones where the US highway took precedent over the old auto trail.
Well, yeah, and also probably because the number's still around today.
True.
El Camino Sierra has origins in the formation of the Indio Good Roads Club, which was founded in April of 1910. El Camino Sierra was formally dedicated in August of 1910 during a tour of the planned route, which was attended by then California Governor James Gillett. Much of early El Camino Sierra was a one-for-one with the 1909 First State Highway Bond Act definition of LRN 23 between Saugus, which is modern-day Santa Clarita, and Bridgeport. Corridor is generally promoted as the Santa Clarita South Lake Tahoe Highway in modern times. El Camino Sierra is heavily associated with US 395 east of the Sierra Nevada range. The auto trail also has historic ties to US Route 6, Route 14, and Route 89. El Camino Sierra never had a true shield design, but was probably signed in a similar fashion to the inland route. The entirety of modern US 395 is also known as the Three Flags Highway. The designation does not appear to predate the US route system.
And if I remember correctly, the Three Flags name refers to US, Mexico, and Canada.
That's what my understanding is, yeah.
I'll note there is an excellent, I want to say it's a 2-volume series on El Camino Sierra. I know I picked up my copies out at Manzanar at the museum there, which is along US 395, which was El Camino Sierra, and it was written by someone who lives up in the Bishop area. This brings us to two more controversial highways, the Bankhead Highway and the Dixie Overland Highway. The Bankhead Highway was plotted in 1916 between San Diego and Washington, D.C., and the Dixie Overland Highway was plotted in 1914 by the Auto Club of Savannah between San Diego and Savannah, Georgia. The routings of the Bankhead Highway and the Dixie Overland Highway in California were the same as the old Spanish Trail. They just differed a bit on the East Coast. The Bankhead symbol was a yellow and black rectangle with yellow and black with yellow at the top with the BH symbol, and the Dixie Overland Highway was a blue and white outline of the U.S. with DOH symbol on it. Now, both highways were named to connect with the Southern Cause narrative, which is also true for the Lee Highway and Davis Highway, which I don't believe went into California. Numerous monuments and markers were placed along the routes. In particular, the Davis Highway was created in response to the Lincoln Highway by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. After the Lincoln Highway was announced in 1912, the Daughters of the Confederacy decided to create a Jefferson-Davis Highway across southern states to commemorate the lost cause. This was the euphemism for, shall we say, something a bit more insidious that was really the cause of the Civil War. They cobbled together local roads and placed some monuments. On the monuments, however, they made the claim that Jefferson Davis was the father of the transcontinental highways because as Secretary of War in 1853, he supposedly surveyed for military use 3 routes across the United States. They claimed these were for highways, but the reality is that the surveys were for possible transcontinental railway paths, a northern, central, and 2 southern Pacific surveys, plus a 5th survey up the west coast. This latter survey was the justification for extending the route north from San Diego up US 99 to the Canadian border. But as usual, this was an after-the-fact retro justification for what they did. These names, understandably now with our modern understandings, are a bit controversial, and they've sort of been de-emphasized. Tom mentioned the 0-point marker at Horton Plaza. As I talked about on my page on Trails and Roads, I believe that marker was removed because it had references to this euphemism and the history of the Davis Highway and the Southern Cause narrative, and it just got removed because of that. So this is a little bit more controversial, but history is history, and our view of history does change over time.
The National Park-to-Park Highway. The National Park-to-Park Highway was plotted in 1916. The purpose of the NPP, that is the acronym, was to plot a singular auto trail between the then existing national parks. In California, the NPP was concurrent with the National Old Trails Road near Needles to Los Angeles. From Los Angeles, the NPP multiplexed the inland route along Ellerin 4 to Merced. The highway had branches in Visalia, which went to Sequoia National Park, future Route 198, and General Grant National Park, future signed Route 65, Route 69, Route 245, and Route 180. You would know this today as Kings Canyon National Park. From Merced, the NPP followed Ellerin 18, this is future Route 140, to Yosemite National Park. The highway departed Yosemite via the old Big Oak Flat Road, Ellerin 40, and Ellerin 66, which are both Route 120 today to Oakdale. From Oakdale, the NPP followed a series of local roads, likely Mariposa Road to Stockton. The NPP followed Ellerin 5 from Stockton west to Oakland, and then Ellerin 14 to the Benicia Martinez Ferry. The NPP followed Ellerin 7 and Ellerin 6 towards Sacramento via the Yellow Causeway. From Sacramento, the highway continued north via Ellerin 3 to Red Bluff. At Red Bluff, the NPP had 2 eastern spurs via Ellerin 29, this is future Route 36, and Ellerin 20, this is future Route 44 to Lassen Volcanic National Park. Keep in mind, there is no through road in the park at the time. From Red Bluff, the mainline NPP followed Ellerin 3 to the Oregon state line. The highway was signed with a black and white shield displaying the full name and 2 large capital Ps.
And the capital Ps were designed so they were facing each other, with the loops sort of touching at the ends. Wasn't there something going around about sort of a new route you might be able to take to drive to all the national parks? I seem to recall seeing something like that.
I've never seen an official update to this. Really, at any point, like the National Park Service doesn't really seem to have a lot of interest in reviving this concept. Like I've seen like maps that they come up with that like suggest routings between the parks, but they kind of tend to be surprisingly not all that scenic, I've found, and it doesn't really line up with what the National Park-to-Park Highway was trying to accomplish.
Next, we have the Roosevelt Midland Trail, which is one I had actually not heard about. The Roosevelt Midland Trail began being signed in 1913 between California and Washington, D.C. You can see we've had a number of trails that pick the same endpoints. The Midland Trail had dual terminus points in Los Angeles and San Francisco. The Midland Trail entered California via Westgard Pass, Route 168, where it branched numerous ways upon reaching the Owens Valley. The original intention was for the Midland Trail to follow the proposed Paiute Pass Highway over the Sierra Nevada Range Toll House Road, Route 168, in Fresno County. One branch of the Midland Trail utilized the Tioga Road, LRN 40, now Route 120, and Altamont Pass, which is the old US 50 Interstate 205, or Business 205, to reach San Francisco. The more northerly San Francisco routing passed through South Lake Tahoe, Placerville, and Sacramento, Legislative Route 11, US 50. The southern San Francisco route went south to the Tehachapi Pass Road, future LRN 58 and US 466, today's Route 58, to reach the Central Valley. The southern route then followed LRN 4, US 99, to the Modesto area and cut west towards Altamont Pass. And that would be, again, following some of what was US 50 in the area. The Los Angeles route used much of LRN 23, US 395, and US 6, now Route 14, south from Owens Valley. It was signed with orange and black shields. Did this originally plan to go over Route 168?
Yeah, so even into the sign route era, there was a lot of interest in the Paiute Pass Highway. When you think about it, it makes a lot of sense why this would survive so far into the 1930s. You had the whole Big Creek project along the Toll House Road corridor that really had that area developed, and the Big Creek project actually extended the Toll House Road all the way to Florence Lake. So that's very, very deep into the Sierra Nevada range. Even today, like that goes well beyond state maintenance as a one-lane Forest Service road. So you have not a very large gap on paper, but you had some hellacious terrain that would have had to been covered. The road was definitely going to ascend above 11,000 feet above sea level. There was this whole interest and mindset in the 1920s and 1930s at surpassing the Tioga Road as a way across the Sierra Nevada that blew the 10,000 foot elevation mark out of the water. And none of these ever got fully built, but a lot of it got constructed. And I don't think most people realize that. What really killed it, though, and if you look at the northern boundary of Kings Canyon National Park, you can see it when General Grant National Park was extended and expanded in 1940 into Kings Canyon National Park. Much of the northern park boundary is the corridor of the planned Paiute Pass Highway. It is almost one for one. It was basically a block by the federal government to stop development because a lot of this was a Forest Service interest. And the Forest Service, for people that don't know, is usually a lot more into developing wilderness land than the National Park Service is and was.
And so since they never could build across 168, that's when they developed the three different routings or four different routings out from the eastern side of the Sierras. Now, how did it get from Route 168 in the Sierras east towards Washington, D.C.?
I really need to look at the map. Like I know it went through Goldfield, but off the top of my head, the routing eludes me in Nevada a little bit.
Does 168 go to the edge of Nevada?
It does. Well, modern 168 does for sure, through Westgard Pass. And Westgard Pass was a big initiative of the Midland Trail, actually.
So it connected to something in Nevada that probably connected eventually over towards, all I can guess is US 6 or US 50, because those would be the routes that would go across Nevada.
Well, and the thing is, too, you got to consider with Westgard Pass the importance of Goldfield at the time. There was a time in the early 20th century where Goldfield was the largest community in Nevada.
And that must have been a long time ago. I know Vegas was not a big community until the 20s or 30s I don't know about Reno.
Yeah, that was the area of the Tonopah Mining District, which most people would know today is the Nellis Air Force Range. Nevada's a very interesting place to me. Like, okay, so Las Vegas, I think most people casually kind of know the history of the place, but really, before Las Vegas really took off, it was really mining that really drove the state, and you had some really just dramatic cycles and booms and busts, and Goldfield in particular really exemplifies that. In my view, you have a community that went to a peak of something like 15,000 residents in like the first decade of the 20th century, and it has less than 200 now. You have a county that is the county seat of Esmeralda County, as like the size of some of the states out east, and you have like 800 people live in the entire county. It's like living after the apocalypse. Like, it's a very surreal place to see. It's part of US Route 95, if anyone was wondering. Like, it's one of my favorite towns to kind of explore anytime I'm passing through Nevada, but just the impact that place was light enough to have, and just how far it fell is kind of amazing. The Pikes Peak Ocean Highway was plotted between New York City and Los Angeles in 1914. This highway was fully concurrent with the National Old Trails Road, which is why I'm not really elaborating on it all that much. The shield design was red and white. So I don't think we touched on this yet, though. A lot of these highways are just strictly concurrent with each other. So this kind of was something that the early U.S. route system sought to avoid, was having like 4 or 5 different highways following the exact same routing to a terminus point. The Victory Highway. The Victory Highway Association was founded in 1921 with the purpose of plotting the highway between San Francisco and New York. The Victory Highway from the Nevada state line west of Sacramento was concurrent with the northern route of the Lincoln Highway. The Victory Highway diverged significantly in the Sacramento River Delta following much of what is now Route 160. The Victory Highway would realign into a corridor roughly following US 40. The association would actually rebrand itself as the US Route 40 Association in 1938. The Victory Highway had a metallic-looking B-shaped shield.
Continuing with some of the smaller or lesser-known highways, the Evergreen National Highway just touched California, as it largely followed the corridors that now make up US 95 and Interstate 40 to Arizona. It was plotted between El Paso, Texas, and Victoria, British Columbia. It was marked with a green and white shield. The center of the shield displayed a tree with the name of the highway.
The new Santa Fe Trail was plotted from Kansas City, Missouri to Los Angeles. Within California, the highway was completely concurrent with the National Old Trails Road. The highway was marked with a black and white colored reassurance shield. The shield displayed a symbol identical to the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, or otherwise known as the ATSF.
Next, we have the Southern National Highway. And the full alignment of the Southern National Highway outside of California was unclear. In California, it entered California near Blythe and followed LRN 64, future US 60, US 70, to the Coachella Valley. From there, it turned south via LRN 26, future US 99, towards El Centro. And from there, it followed the old Spanish Trail west to San Diego. It was signed with a red, white, and blue shield that displayed a star with the initials S and H.
The Atlantic and Pacific Highway was plotted between New York City and Los Angeles during the 1920s. The highway would largely follow the future routing of US Route 60 along LRN 64 and LRN 26 from Blythe to Los Angeles. The highway had a yellow and black shield with a AP symbol on it. The California Banff Beeline Highway was plotted between Banff, Alberta, and Los Angeles. The highway was co-signed with Pacific Highway in California. The highway shield was white and blue.
This brings us to the Lee Highway. This was plotted between New York and San Francisco in 1919. It entered California near Yuma and was concurrent with the old Spanish Trail to San Diego. From San Diego, the highway was concurrent with the Pacific Highway to San Francisco. It was a blue and gray shield displaying the word Lee. And so let's digress for a second. When we say this was plotted between New York and San Francisco, what we really mean it was plotted from New York down to the south, across the south to San Diego, and then up to San Francisco. And the blue and gray in the shield and the word Lee makes it clear. This was one of those highways that was named to accentuate the lost cause narrative of the southern states. We've talked about that earlier.
The Lone Star Trail is plotted from St. Augustine, Florida to Los Angeles. The routing within California is not known beyond it entering the state near Yuma. The design of this highway shield is really unclear. I've never found good documentation for it.
Do you know anything about the routing in California? If it didn't go to San Diego, it most likely followed LRN 26 and did that route. But
unfortunately, I can't find any maps that really display this clearly. And there's not a lot of resources I found that really spell it out in detail. I'm sure they exist, but I just couldn't find it when I was developing this slide. I suspect it just went to San Diego and it was completely concurrent with the old Spanish Trail, but I could be wrong.
And with that, I'll note there really aren't a lot of good websites on auto trails. I'd love that. James Schul at one point, I think, had one, and I'm not sure if it's out there anymore. And we really need some good resources out on the web on the old auto trails. Now, that differs from what we've got for some more modern National Park Service auto trails, which are well signed and are well documented on the Park Service website. So there's the San Juan Bautista de Anza Trail, which goes from the Mexican border in Nogales, Arizona to San Francisco. This highway emulates the approximate 1,200-mile path of trail that the Juan Bautista de Anza expedition followed in 1774. It's marked with NPS signage, and they have a standard trail signage. There's a Volcanic Legacy Scenic Byway, which is designated in the Cascade Range of Oregon and California. The southern end of the highway forms a loop of Lassen Volcanic National Park. It's marked with National Park Service signs. This is along much of Route 44. The Pony Express National Historic Trail runs from St. Joseph, Missouri to San Francisco. The routing in places is signed, but NPS maps generally show the original overland corridor and locations of relay houses. Within California, the main line of the Pony Express followed what was the Lake Tahoe Wagon Road over the Sierra Nevada Range. This would later become part of the Southern Lincoln Highway and early US 50. West of Sacramento, signage can sometimes be found near I-80, I-680, and Route 24. Each of these trails is designed to facilitate and encourage tourism along the historic overland corridors. The Park Service also signs the Old Spanish Trail.
Next time on California Highways Route by Route. As we noted, we've completed Season 2. We're still writing episodes, so we have a bit more of a season break to go. Once the bulk of the writing is done, we'll pick up Season 3, which we will cover Route 3 through Route 7.
You can sort of expect Season 3 to start dropping sometime in September. And the one other thing I'll note at this point is normally we have a discussion of the various routes at the end of the episode. I think we'll skip that. We've discussed each route as we've been discussing them along the episode, and we're probably getting a bit long. For more information, I have a page on named trails on the California Highways webpage, and on each highway that is part of a trail, I try and put the trail information on that page. Tom has a bunch of Gribble Nation blogs on the subject, which he will send me, and I will link into the show notes. And there will be some additional links on the show notes page, including some links to some books I have on the auto trails.
As always, information on this episode is available on our website, caroutebyroute.org, where you can leave us comments on the episode. Spotify has also added a comment feature, so you may also comment there if you feel inclined to do so.
This episode is also available on our Spotify for Podcasters home. This used to be Anchor.fm. Podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/CA route by route, one word.
I encourage you to like, favorite, subscribe, share, and rate our show in whatever podcast format you happen to listen to this in. Remember that after the credits, we often have a bit of discussion on the subject of the episode, so generally stick around because that's usually kind of where a lot of the non-scripted stuff we talk about comes from. Join us as we continue to explore California highways route by route.
And note, we're not doing that extended discussion on this episode. This episode was written by Daniel Fagan and Tom Fear, mostly by Tom this time. Edited and produced by Daniel Fagan. Our opening theme is I Like to Be by the Seaside by John H. Glover-Kind. Episodes are recorded using freeconferencecall.com, and this podcast is a product of California Highways at cahighways.org and Gribble Nation at gribblnation.org. And with that, we will say goodbye. This will end Season 2, and look forward sometime in September for our first episode of Season 3, where we will discuss Route 3, which would sound like it's an old route, but it's actually a relatively newer route that was created in the 1964 renumbering when they renumbered what had been State Route 3, which had gone along the coast. And with that, I think we'll end it.